Number 15. The Valentish Disappearance. On October 21, 1978, civilian pilot Frederick Valentish was flying his Cessna 182 over the Bass Strait between Victoria and Tasmania. Just after 7 p.m, Valentish contacted Melbourne Flight Service stating a larger aircraft was hovering above him in close pursuit. Melbourne radioed back confirming there was no known aircrafts within the vicinity, but Valentish continued to describe the larger aircraft following him, saying it had 4 bright landing lights and was flying at around 1,000 feet. He then stated the large aircraft was moving closer towards him and acting as if the pilot was toying with him. Suddenly communication was lost to the Cessna after Valentish said,
"Strange aircraft hovering on top of me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft."
Officials have determined Valentish was undergoing some sort of disorientation and had actually collided with the ground, and others have theorized he staged this as either a suicide or an attempt to start a new life, creating the UFO story in order to keep people talking. One popular theory is a UFO had been following the Cessna and had either accidentally or purposefully collided with Valentish's plane or had abducted him. Whatever the explanation, Valentish or his crash site were never discovered, and it is assumed he fatally crashed into the water. Number 14. The Betty Andreasson Abduction. Betty Andreasson was in her kitchen when her home experienced a power outage. Thinking the breakers just went, she was soon startled by several grey men who entered her home by seemingly travelling through the wall as if it was only smoke or fog. The tallest of the strange beings stayed with Andreasson as the other creatures searched through her home and placed her family members in a sort of suspended animation. Afterwards, the beings escorted Andreasson into their ship, where they proceeded to conduct different medical procedures on her. So far, her story connects with other alleged encounters with extraterrestrials, but after the proceedings were finished, things took a sudden curve. Andreasson claims the aliens explained how they too were Christians and assured her Jesus Christ would soon be returning to Earth, then mentally showed her the image of a phoenix rising from the ashes. She was unable to recall much of what happened afterwards, as far from traumatic. She believes the beings were attempting to convey a message of peace between them and the human race, as well as develop a connection based on the similar belief systems the two had, using her as the medium in order to spread that message to the rest of the Earth. Number 13. Rendlesham Forest Incident. Regarded as the UK's most famous UFO case, a series of unexplained lights were reportedly sighted in and around the Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, in England, late December 1980. The first report came on Boxing Day, when a call came in about a possible downed airplane spotted falling into the woods. The Royal Air Force quickly set out to investigate, and first responders found a floating metallic object surrounded by a yellow mist hovering over a clearing with blue and red lights strobing. As the men attempted to approach it, it moved away and vanished. They reported back saying a UFO had touched down to Earth, and the next morning the site was checked and small triangular impressions were discovered on the ground. Geiger counters showed 10 times the normal radiation level at the site, and witnesses recalled being threatened into signing documents forcing their silence. The official report of the incident was made available to the public in 1983 under the US Freedom of Information Act, which included a tape by Lieutenant Colonel Holt and his patrol as they ventured through the trees to search for the crash site. Neither the US nor British government have offered an alternative explanation to the event, except that it was simply a lighthouse mistaken for a UFO. Number 12. The Kelly Hopkinsville Goblin. On the night of August 21st, 1955, the Taylor family was on a weekend vacation visiting family friends named the Suttons on the Sutton Farm in Kentucky. That night, the residents and guests of the house heard strange noises coming from the forest. The men armed themselves with guns and trekked out in search of an explanation when a strange creature emerged from the tree line. It was described as 3.5 foot tall, had a large head, pointed ears, glowing eyes, and talon-like fingers, whilst also emitting a strange glow. Panicked, the men opened fire on the creature and were horrified when their bullets did not appear to injure it. The creature was frightened by the loud noises and fled back into the forest and vanished. After returning to the house to compose themselves, the families reported similar creatures would occasionally creep up on the house and peer in through the windows. Some even made it onto the roof and would float down instead of fall. The men eventually raced into town and gathered a posse of police and civilians to search the woods, but the creatures were nowhere to be found. All members of the Taylor and Sutton family were deeply traumatized by the experience. Sketches of the beast drawn by the witnesses were later compared to a creature accompanied by a UFO spotted by a group of school children and teachers in Dyfed, Wales in 1977, leading one to ponder if these were the same beings who terrorized the Kentucky farm 22 years before. Number 11. The Cash Landrum Encounter. Betty Cash and Vicky and Colby Landrum were driving home from a night out on December 29, 1980, in Dayton, Texas. While traveling along the isolated road, the trio spotted a bright light above the trees, which they decided to investigate. They found a large diamond-shaped vessel hovering over them, and it appeared to be expelling flame towards the ground. The heat was so intense, the metal of the car became extremely hot, and Vicky's arm suffered burns from the melting vinyl of the seats. As the UFO ascended, 24 military helicopters entered the airspace, causing the trio to flee the scene. Vicky's burns were so severe, her arm was scarred for the remainder of her life. All witnesses suffered from nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, weakness, eye pain, and a sunburn sensation on their skin immediately following the encounter. A few days later, Cash developed painful blisters on her arm, was unable to walk, and lost patches of skin and bits of hair. A physician discovered the party was suffering damage from ionized radiation. The group attempted to sue the US government for damages and to pay off their medical bills, but the case was dismissed due to lack of evidence that the US military was involved and the fact no large, diamond-shaped aircraft existed in the fleet. Dayton detective Lamar Walker did claim he and his wife spotted a dozen helicopters in the sky near the scene the trio said the event took place. To date, the US government has given no official statement as to what possibly could have happened to Betty, Vicky, and Colby that night. Number 10. The Hill Abduction. New Hampshire couple Barney and Betty Hill were enjoying a vacation to visit Niagara Falls and Montreal, Canada. They were returning home on September 10, 1961, when an object rapidly descended onto their car. The couple pulled over and cautiously exited to fully observe the UFO above them. Barney observed several humanoid figures peering out at them from the craft, with one somehow communicating with them, "Stay where you are and keep looking." Barney realized the creatures were about to abduct them and panicked. He ran back to the car and immediately sped off, the UFO still in pursuit. Barney and Betty said they then experienced a dulled mind sensation before stopping at a roadblock. Upon returning home, they discovered their watches were not working and both had strange compulsions to examine their bodies for any discrepancies, though they found nothing. Betty contacted the US Air Force to report the encounter, though the officials dismissed it as a case of misidentification. Betty later suffered nightmares where she and Barney were taken into the craft and examined before being allowed to return to their car. Due to fear of public scrutiny, the Hills kept their encounter a secret until 1963, when they finally told a church group of the experience and later to a wider view after both underwent hypnotherapy and newspapers picked up the story. Barney passed away in 1965 and Betty passed away in 2004. Number 9. The Mothman. In 1966 and 1967, the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was terrorized by a winged creature dubbed the Mothman due to eyewitnesses describing its appearance as a moth-like humanoid. The creature was best known for its large, glowing red eyes, which seemed to reflect light off them like bicycle reflectors. Many of the sightings were around the TNT area, a former Second World War munitions factory, and was usually accompanied by strange lights in the sky. Many ufologists believe the Mothman was a form of extraterrestrial visiting us with malicious intent, due to the aggressive way it would pursue motorists and people walking in the area surrounding Point Pleasant. On December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge connecting West Virginia with Ohio collapsed, killing 46 people. Many reported spotting the Mothman around the bridge and the night before the tragic event, leading many to believe it had something to do with the bridge's destruction. Since that day, the Mothman has never been seen in Point Pleasant again, but many claim to still see the beast around the world to this day. Number 8. The Battle of Los Angeles. In the early stages of America's entrance to the Second World War, Americans were on edge due to the recent attack on Pearl Harbor. Only 2 months following the attack, air raid sirens blared in the Los Angeles area after objects were spotted in the skies over the city. The Los Angeles area was placed on blackout and searchlights illuminated the sky as anti-aircraft fired on what it believed to be Japanese aircraft planning to bomb key targets in the city. The blackout was lifted at 7 a.m. the next morning, and then Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox declared the incident as a false alarm. The famous photograph of the incident shows strange balls of light floating above LA between the searchlight beams. Many ufologists believe these strange lights to be illuminated by UFOs, and the military was firing on extraterrestrial crafts, not Japanese. Whether or not these beings were visiting on hostile intent is a subject of debate in the field, but regardless, the official explanation of war nerves is thought to be a conspiracy meant to keep the true nature of that night a secret. The event was the main inspiration to the 2011 film Battle Los Angeles, which depicts a modern alien invasion of Earth. Number 7. The Canary Islands Case. Spanish naval ship Atrevita was sailing near the Canary Islands on June 22, 1976, when the crew observed a yellow light moving towards them from the shore. At first, it appeared to be an airplane with the landing lights on, but as it moved closer, witnesses noticed it was cylindrical and rotating in a clockwise fashion. The crew continued to watch the object for 40 minutes, until it emitted a bright light and vanished. The captain immediately radioed the nearest base and reported the incident to superiors, which the 100-plus man crew of the ship all backed up. Not only that, but a local physician, Dr. Francisco Padrón, also wrote an official statement claiming he and several other residents of his city, Las Rosas, attested to the accounts of both Padrón and the sailors. However, in Padrón's statement, he described the object as see-through and appeared to be made of crystal-like material, with the lower platform having an aluminium-looking metal spread across the bottom. The files concerning the case were declassified in 1994, with photographs taken by residents and Navy officials. A similar incident occurred nearby, when 2 people saw a UFO over the horizon and vanished 3 minutes later. Both incidents remain unexplained. Number 6. Communion. In 1987, a man named Whitney Strieber wrote and published a book called Communion, a true story, detailing his experiences with strange visitors which he had no idea who or what they were, or what they wanted, and said he wrote Communion as a way of understanding his own experience. The book garnered wide popularity and helped boost the idea of abduction phenomenon in popularity. Strieber claimed after the book's publication his experiences got stranger. He claimed to have taken a wrong turn while in New Jersey, where he discovered a strange town not represented on any maps he'd possessed. It was his experiences in this town that led him to conclude aliens are not only visiting us, but beginning to live among us as a sort of spy network, constantly collecting information on the day-to-day lives of humans. After telling this story, his credibility began to drop, and many former admirers found themselves disillusioned. Believe or don't believe, Strieber's claims do provoke thought of what if aliens really are living among us in plain sight. The idea of little green men or the popularized grey men are well known, but for all we know, aliens could look no different from us, allowing them to live life normally without ever being found. Number 5. The Fargo Dogfight. Veteran pilot George Gorman was flying over Fargo, North Dakota on October 1, 1948, when he noticed a strange object to the west of him. Gorman radioed base and stated he was going after the aircraft to see if he could identify its model, but soon found it was going too fast for his P-51 Mustang to catch up. Without warning, the object flew within 500 feet of Gorman's plane, after which it briefly disappeared from sight. Upon regaining eye contact with the vessel, it made a 180-degree turn and sped straight towards the P-51, but turned upwards into a vertical climb. Gorman did his best to climb to the same altitude as the UFO, but his plane stalled at 14,000 feet, with the object still 2,000 feet above him. At this time, the 2 aircraft were over Fargo Airport, and controllers in the tower were able to observe the object through their binoculars, which they all agreed the UFO had no distinguishable shape or form. Gorman landed back at the airport and was greeted by a colleague with a Geiger counter. It was discovered Gorman's plane was now emitting levels of radiation. While Air Force officials dismissed the incident as a misidentified air balloon, Gorman and the other witnesses were convinced it was an unworldly vessel. Several other people, including another airplane, saw the object, and it even appeared on radar back at the control tower. However, Air Force officials have stuck with their original findings, and the true nature of the UFO remains unknown. Number 4. The Brooklyn Bridge abduction. A rather strange and traumatic event unfolded at the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City on November 30th, 1989 at around 3 a.m. Several witnesses were horrified when a UFO hovered over the famous bridge and 2 aliens were seen carrying Linda Cortile out of her 12th floor apartment, hovering up into the craft from a beam of light. After the 3 entered the craft, the UFO dove down into the East River and vanished. She later awoke back into her apartment and found her husband and son in a form of suspended animation. Famous alien enthusiast and author Bud Hopkins wrote the book Witness about the abduction and Linda Cortile's ordeal afterwards. Critics have been quick to point out the unlikelihood of such an event taking place with only a few witnesses in Manhattan. But 3 of the people who say they saw the event unfold was then Secretary General of the United Nations Perez de Cuellar and his Secret Service escorts. According to the officers, Cuellar was visibly shaken and disturbed by what had transpired. However, while Cuellar corresponded with Hopkins and even verified he was a witness, he declined to go public in order not to damage his personal life with ridicule. In 1991, Cortile had an X-ray done of her head, and it was discovered that an unnatural object was lodged in her nasal cavity, resembling a shaft about 1/4 inch long. Witness has become a huge hit with the UFO community, and Hopkins and Cortile have agreed to equally split the profits between each other. Number 3. Foo Fighters. In November 1944, Allied pilots were conducting a night flight over Germany when they noticed fast-moving objects in close pursuit of their aircraft. The pilots described these UFOs as glowing light orbs that appeared to resemble Christmas lights of various colors and would move in rather erratic but maneuvered as if controlled by something, and displayed no threatening or otherwise hostile behavior. Allied pilots dubbed these anomalies Foo Fighters and, to a lesser extent, Kraut fireballs. It was initially thought to be a new German weapon, an idea which was published in the New York Times in December of the same year. Pilots in the Pacific Theater of Conflict also reported strange lights, though more resembling balls of fire and mostly stationary, occasionally following the Allied planes. Ufologists today credit the existence of Foo Fighters as extraterrestrial creations, possible UFOs piloted by alien life forms. Other theories suggest these strange sightings were occurrences of St. Elmo's fire or ball lightning. Regardless, Foo Fighters continued to be an unexplained phenomenon that has brought people over to the side of believing there is other intelligent life out there. Number 2. Fire in the Sky. On November 5, 1974, contract logger Mike Rogers contacted police in Heber, Arizona, to report one of his crewmen had gone missing after their shift. When sheriff's deputies arrived to speak with the shaken men, it was revealed their colleague, 22-year-old Travis Walton, was abducted by a strange object in the sky. The UFO shot a beam of light towards Walton, which appeared to stun him, then toss him 10 feet. The crew drove off in terror and contacted authorities immediately upon entering town. The crew became vilified after news of the story broke out, and it was widely believed the crew came up with the elaborate story to cover up an accident or homicide. Things changed 5 days later when Walton suddenly appeared alive but deeply traumatized. 2 family members who picked him up recall Walton being confused and almost hysterical, believing he had been gone only a few hours. All members of the crew were subjected to a polygraph test, and all men were shown to be telling the truth, except one test which was declared invalid, and lead investigator Sheriff Marlin Gillespie accepted the UFO story as truthful. Walton later had his experience developed into a book and later a feature film, both titled Fire in the Sky. Number 1. The Belgian UFO epidemic. UFOs appeared over the Belgian sky in droves between November 1989 and April 1990, with as many as 2,000 people reporting strange, triangular aircrafts at night. On November 29, 1989 alone, 30 different groups and 3 police officers reported low-flying aircraft, triangular lights illuminating the bottom, and no audible sound coming from it. The sightings peaked on the night between March 30th and 31st, 1990, with approximately 13,500 people spotting the same aircraft and 2,600 issuing written statements to investigators. After this night, the Belgian Air Force launched a full investigation into the sightings, and several fighters were scrambled that night in order to search for any foreign aircraft entering the Belgian airspace, though none were ever found. A lucky man from Wallonia was able to capture a photograph of the UFO in June 1990, which bore a striking resemblance to photographs taken during the wave, though it was later revealed to have been a hoax. Skeptics have attempted to explain the sightings as a form of stealth aircraft that were flying over Belgium, though believers are quick to point out that the bright lights shining down to the ground were a dead giveaway for such technology. So far, no official explanation has been released, and native Belgians and tourists alike continue to search the skies in the hope of the strange UFO returning.
Got an idea for a top 15 list? Submit it at top15s.net/submit. Be sure to subscribe for future videos. Thanks for watching.